every belief of Shia Islam explained, from the Imamite and the 12 Imams to the hidden Imam, Ashura, Muta, Taqiyya, Wilayat al-Faqih, and the Aga Khan. Today, more than 200 million Shia Muslims live across the world, making Shia Islam the second largest branch of Islam after Sunni Islam. But many Muslims and non-Muslims have heard these beliefs without ever understanding what Shia Muslims actually believe, where those beliefs come from, or why they matter. In this video, we will go step by step through the major beliefs, practices, and branches of Shia Islam, using their own sources, historical context, and modern-day practice, not to debate them, but to understand them. We already covered the differences between Sunni and Shia Islam in detail in a separate video, so if you want a deeper understanding of the topic, make sure to watch that video next. You'll find the link in the description below. Now, before we go through each belief, let's first understand what Shia Islam actually is. What is Shia Islam? Before we talk about what Shia Muslims believe, we first need to understand who they are and how this division began. The word Shia comes from the Arabic phrase Shiat Ali, which means the followers or the party of Ali. From the very beginning, it referred to those who believed that Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was the rightful leader of the Muslim community after the Prophet's death. And the story begins at one of the most emotional moments in Islamic history. In 632 CE, the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away. While the Muslim community was grieving, a group of companions gathered and chose Abu Bakr as the first caliph. The majority of Muslims accepted this decision, but not everyone agreed. A smaller group believed that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had already designated Ali as his successor through divine instruction, and that passing over him was a serious mistake. These people became known as the first Shia. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few decades, the division grew deeper. When Ali eventually became the fourth caliph, his leadership was challenged almost immediately. Then in 661 CE, Ali was assassinated. After him, his son Hassan stepped aside. Then came Husayn. Unlike his brother, Husayn refused to give allegiance to the Umayyad ruler Yazid. That decision led him to the plains of Karbala in 680 CE, where he and most of his family were killed. For the early Shia community, Karbala was not just a tragedy. It became the defining event of their identity, a story of sacrifice, loyalty, suffering, and resistance that continues to shape Shia belief and culture more than 14 centuries later. And today, Shia Islam is not a single movement. Over the centuries, it has divided into several branches, including the Twelvers, Ismailis, Zaydis, Dawoodi Bohras, Alawites, and others. Now that you know what Shia Islam is, let's start with the first belief, which is belief in the imamate. Now we come to the most important belief in Twelver Shia Islam. Not a prayer, not a ritual, not a practice. A belief about authority, specifically who has the right to lead the Muslim Ummah and interpret Islam after the Prophet, peace be upon him. This doctrine is known as the imamate, and if you want to understand Twelver Shia Islam, you must first understand this belief because almost everything else is built upon it. In Sunni Islam, the caliph was primarily a political and administrative leader. He was chosen by the community, could make mistakes, and did not possess any special divine authority. But in Twelver Shia Islam, the imam is something completely different. He is not elected. He is not chosen by the people, and he is not simply a political leader. According to this belief, the imam is appointed by Allah himself, designated by the previous imam, and serves as the living interpreter of the Quran and the Sunnah. He is seen as the one who preserves the true understanding of Islam that was passed down by the Prophet, peace be upon him. And this is where the belief becomes much deeper. The primary evidence for this doctrine comes from Al-Kafi, the most authoritative hadith collection in Twelver Shia Islam, compiled in the 10th century. Its largest section is known as the Book of Divine Proof, containing more than 1,000 narrations dedicated to establishing the necessity and authority of the imam. Some of these narrations make extraordinary claims. One narration states that the earth cannot exist without a divine proof from Allah. Another says that if only two people remained alive on earth, one of them would be the imam over the other. Think about what that means. The practical consequence of this belief is enormous. For Twelver Shia Muslims, Islam cannot be fully understood or correctly practiced without the guidance of a divinely appointed imam. Not a scholar elected by the people, not a ruler chosen by the community, but an authority appointed by Allah himself. However, it is important to understand that not all Shia groups share this exact belief. The Zaydis accept a form of imamate, but reject divine appointment. The Ismailis also accept the concept of imamate, but they follow a different line of imams. And Sunnis reject this entire framework altogether. And this single belief became one of the biggest differences between Sunni and Shia Islam: belief in Ali's leadership. Everything in Twelver Shia theology begins with one central belief: a belief about succession, a belief about leadership, and a belief that one decision changed the course of Islamic history forever. According to Twelver Shia belief, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not leave the question of leadership open after his death. Rather, they believe he explicitly designated Ali ibn Abi Talib as his rightful successor, and that this appointment was later ignored. The event most often cited as evidence took place during the final weeks of the Prophet's life. Returning from the farewell pilgrimage, the Prophet, peace be upon him, stopped at a place called Ghadir Hum and addressed a massive gathering of companions. Then he made a statement that would become one of the most debated sentences in Islamic history. He said, "Whoever I am his Mawla, Ali is his Mawla," and then he raised Ali's hand before the crowd. What makes this event so fascinating is that the event itself is not disputed. It is recorded in major sources, including Sahih Muslim and Musnad Ahmad, and is acknowledged by scholars from both Sunni and Shia traditions. The disagreement is not about what happened. The disagreement is about what the Prophet, peace be upon him, meant. Shia scholars interpret the word Mawla as master, leader, and divinely appointed successor. Sunni scholars generally interpret it as beloved friend, ally, or one deserving loyalty, arguing that if political succession had been intended, clearer words such as Khalifa would have been used. And this single word became one of the greatest points of disagreement in Islamic history. For Twelver Shia Muslims, Ghadir Hum is not just a historical event. It is a defining moment, a moment so important that it is commemorated every year as Eid al-Ghadir, a celebration that many Shia communities regard as one of the greatest occasions in the Islamic calendar. Because in their understanding, this was the day the Prophet, peace be upon him, publicly completed his mission by announcing his successor. But this raises an important question. What status does Ali actually hold in Twelver Shia theology? The answer is significant. In mainstream Twelver belief, Ali is considered the greatest human being after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He is regarded as the first imam, divinely appointed by Allah, protected from error in religious matters, and an authority whose obedience is inseparable from obedience to Allah and his messenger. He is viewed as superior to all other companions, and this remains one of the core positions of Twelver Shia theology. Some classical Shia scholars went even further. They argued that Ali was superior not only to the companions, but even to prophets such as Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa alayhim salam. This opinion exists within the tradition and has been held by notable scholars, although it has never been universally accepted and remains a matter of scholarly discussion rather than an agreed-upon doctrine. Then there is another historical group known as the Gulat, the extremists. These groups push their beliefs far beyond mainstream Twelver positions. Some claim that Jibril had mistakenly delivered revelation to Muhammad, peace be upon him, when it was actually intended for Ali. Others attributed divine or semi-divine qualities to Ali himself. These beliefs are not accepted by mainstream Twelver scholars. In fact, both classical and contemporary Shia authorities have strongly condemned such ideas as deviation and extremism. However, these groups existed historically, and understanding them helps explain why certain extreme claims occasionally appear in discussions about Shia beliefs. And even today, devotion to Ali remains deeply woven into Twelver Shia life. His name appears in supplications. His virtues are remembered constantly. Children are named after him. His legacy is taught from generation to generation. For Twelver Shia Muslims, Ali is not simply a respected figure from history. He is the foundation of the entire chain of divine authority that follows after the Prophet, peace be upon him. Belief in the 12 Imams. Now we come to one of the most important beliefs in Twelver Shia Islam. In fact, the name Twelver itself comes from this belief. According to Twelver Shia theology, after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Allah did not leave the Muslim community without guidance. Instead, there was a continuous chain of exactly 12 divinely appointed Imams from the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him, each one personally designated by the Imam before him. This chain begins with Ali ibn Abi Talib. Then come his two sons, Hassan and Hussein. After them, 9 more descendants through the line of Hussein: Ali ibn Hussein Zain al-Abidin, Muhammad al-Bakir, Jafar al-Sadiq, Musa al-Kazim, Ali al-Rida, Muhammad al-Jawad, Ali al-Hadi, Hassan al-Askari, and finally Muhammad al-Mahdi, the 12th Imam. But according to Twelver belief, these men were not simply respected scholars or descendants of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Each Imam was specifically chosen by Allah and identified by the Imam before him through a process known as Nas. This means the chain was not based on family inheritance alone. It was believed to be a divinely guided succession, where every Imam explicitly named his successor before before his death, and when you look at their lives, a pattern begins to emerge. Most of these imams lived during the rule of the Abbasid caliphs, who often viewed them with suspicion and saw them as potential threats. Several of these imams are believed by Shia Muslims to have been poisoned. Rather than building armies or fighting for political power, many focused on teaching, preserving religious knowledge, educating students, and keeping the spiritual identity of their community alive during difficult times. Among all 12, one imam stands out in particular, Jafar al-Sadiq, the sixth imam. His influence was so great that an entire school of jurisprudence bears his name. His reputation as a scholar spread throughout the Islamic world, attracting students from different regions who came to learn directly from him. And this belief in exactly 12 imams is unique to 12er Shia Islam. In fact, one of the biggest divisions within Shia history happened over this very issue. The Ismaili branch separated because of a disagreement regarding who should succeed the sixth imam. Meanwhile, the Zaydis took a completely different approach and do not accept a fixed number of imams at all. So while many groups share the name Shia, their understanding of leadership and succession can be very different. And for 12er Shia Muslims, this chain of 12 imams forms the backbone of their entire religious worldview, belief in infallibility. But this raises a very important question. If the imam is responsible for preserving and explaining Islam, what prevents him from making a mistake that could misguide millions of people? The 12er Shia answer is simple: Isma, infallibility. According to this doctrine, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Fatima, and all 12 imams were protected by Allah from sin and error when conveying and interpreting religious guidance. Together, they are known as the 14 infallibles. Now, this does not mean they were divine, and it does not mean they did not experience ordinary human life. They ate, slept, suffered, and lived like human beings. Rather, the belief is that when it came to religion, guidance, and teaching the faith, they could not make mistakes. You can think of it as an extension of a concept that Sunnis already accept regarding the Prophet, peace be upon him, in transmitting revelation. The difference is that 12er theology extends this protection beyond the Prophet to Fatima and the entire chain of imams. The primary Quranic evidence cited for this belief is the famous verse of purification in Surah Al-Ahzab 33:33, where Allah states his desire to remove impurity from the Ahl al-Bayt and purify them completely. In addition, Al-Kafi contains numerous narrations that Shia scholars use to establish that the imams were protected from error in religious matters. And this belief has enormous consequences, because if an imam is infallible, then a narration traced back to him carries extraordinary authority. Why? Because an infallible imam could not knowingly transmit false religious guidance. This becomes one of the biggest structural differences between Sunni and Shia approaches to religious authority. However, not all Shia groups accept this doctrine. The Zaydis reject infallibility entirely. The Ismailis accept a form of it, but understand it differently. But within 12er Shia Islam, infallibility remains one of the most unique and defining theological beliefs. Belief about the Quran. Now we come to one of the most controversial topics often discussed when comparing Sunni and Shia beliefs, the Quran. And on this issue, the mainstream 12er position is actually very clear. Leading contemporary authorities such as Grand Ayatollah Sistani and Grand Ayatollah Khamenei affirm that the Quran we have today is the exact same Quran revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, complete, preserved, and free from corruption. This has been the position of major 12er scholars for more than 1,000 years. So where does the controversy come from? The answer lies within parts of the classical Shia Hadith literature. In Al-Kafi, there are narrations that have generated debate among scholars for centuries. One narration attributes to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq a statement suggesting that the original Quran contained far more verses than the text that exists today. Another narration discusses something known as the Mushaf of Fatima. According to these reports, this was a separate book dictated to Fatima after the Prophet's death. It is described as being 3 times larger than the Quran. But importantly, the narrations themselves explicitly state that it contains no Quranic verses. Instead, it is said to contain knowledge, future events, and information passed to her. These narrations exist within the tradition, and historically, a minority of scholars interpreted them as evidence that the Quran had undergone alteration. However, the mainstream 12er scholarly tradition rejected that conclusion. Instead, scholars maintained that the Quran remained fully preserved, and that these narrations either required reinterpretation or possessed weaknesses in their chains of transmission. And when we move away from academic debates and look at everyday religious life, the reality is straightforward. The vast majority of Shia Muslims read the same Quran, recite the same verses, memorize the same chapters, and show the same reverence toward the Quran as other Muslims. Belief about Hadith. Now, you might be wondering, if both Sunni and Shia Muslims follow the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, then why do their scholars sometimes arrive at completely different rulings on the same issue? The answer lies partly in one word, hadith. More specifically, which hadith collections each tradition considers authoritative. In Sunni Islam, there are 6 major canonical hadith collections that form the foundation of religious scholarship. But in Shia Islam, there is a different set of collections known as the 4 books. The largest and most influential among them is Al-Kafi, compiled in the 10th century and containing approximately 16,000 narrations. At first glance, this may not seem like a major difference, but when you look deeper, you find that the entire structure of transmission works differently. In Sunni hadith methodology, narrations are traced back to the Prophet, peace be upon him, through chains of companions and later transmitters. In 12er Shia hadith, however, narrations often pass through one of the 12 imams. And this changes everything, because according to 12er theology, the imams are not simply respected scholars or righteous descendants of the Prophet, peace be upon him. They are considered divinely appointed and protected from error in religious guidance, which means that when a narration comes from one of the imams, it is not viewed as an ordinary scholarly opinion. It is treated as authoritative religious guidance coming from an infallible source. For example, a ruling attributed to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq is not merely seen as the interpretation of a scholar. For 12er Shia Muslims, it carries religious authority because it comes through an imam believed to be protected from error. And this is one of the major reasons why Sunni and Shia scholars can reach different legal conclusions. It is not always because they are interpreting the same evidence differently. Often, they are working from different collections of authoritative evidence in the first place. Each tradition has its own framework, its own methodology, and its own sources that it considers primary. There is also an important point that is often overlooked. Shia hadith scholars themselves acknowledge that not every narration found in Al-Kafi is automatically authentic. In fact, many classical and contemporary scholars have stated that a significant number of narrations within the collection are weak according to Shia hadith standards. For this reason, the authentication and evaluation of narrations remains an ongoing area of scholarly discussion within the Shia tradition itself. And understanding this helps explain why hadith, authority, and religious interpretation developed differently in Sunni and Shia Islam over the centuries. Belief in taqiyya. Now we come to one of the most misunderstood beliefs in Shia Islam, a belief that is often discussed, frequently criticized, and sometimes completely misrepresented. It is called taqiyya. The word literally means precautionary concealment. In simple terms, it refers to the permission to hide one's religious beliefs when facing real danger or persecution. The foundation for this concept comes from the Quran itself. In Surah An-Nahl 16 verse 106, Allah speaks about a person who is forced to utter words of disbelief while his heart remains firm in faith. The concept is also discussed in narrations found in Al-Kafi, where statements attributed to the imams address the practice directly. But to truly understand why this belief became important, we need to understand the historical context. For generations, the Shia imams and their followers lived under rulers who often viewed them as political threats. Supporting the family of Ali openly could sometimes come with severe consequences. In certain periods, it could mean imprisonment, torture, or even death. Imagine living in a society where publicly declaring your beliefs could cost you your life. What would you do? This is the environment in which the doctrine of taqiyya developed. For example, if a Shia Muslim lived in a region where openly identifying as Shia would lead to persecution, he might outwardly identify himself as Sunni in order to protect himself. According to 12er theology, that statement would not change what he truly believes. His heart remains the same. His faith remains the same. Only his words change, and only because he is under genuine threat. This is why taqiyya was historically understood as a tool of survival, not a strategy for everyday life, not a permission to deceive people for personal benefit, and not a license to lie whenever it is convenient. Rather, it developed as a way for a vulnerable minority community to survive during periods of persecution and political hostility. And today, mainstream Shia scholars place important limits on its use. Contemporary authorities generally state that taqiyya applies only when there is a real danger to life, safety, or significant property. It is not intended for ordinary social situations or daily interactions. In fact, many contemporary Shia leaders place strong emphasis on Muslim unity and cooperation, which moves in the opposite direction of concealment in normal circumstances. So while taqiyya remains an important concept in 12er Shia theology, its historical purpose was survival under persecution, not deception as a way of life. Belief belief in the hidden imam. Now we come to perhaps the most unique and fascinating belief in all of Twelver Shia Islam, a belief that has shaped Shia identity for more than 1,000 years, and a belief that still influences the lives of millions of people today. It begins in the year 874 CE. The 11th Imam, Hassan al-Askari, passed away, but according to Twelver Shia belief, he did not leave the Muslim community without guidance. His representatives announced that he had left behind a son named Muhammad, a child who had been hidden from the Abbasid authorities throughout his early life. And this is where the story takes an extraordinary turn. According to Twelver theology, this young imam entered a period known as the Minor Occultation. From 874 CE until 941 CE, the hidden imam remained concealed from public view, but communication with the community did not completely stop. Instead, it continued through 4 successive deputies. These 4 men acted as intermediaries between the hidden imam and his followers. They conveyed his guidance, answered questions on his behalf, and maintained the connection between the hidden leader and the outside world. For decades, this system continued. Then everything changed. As the 4th deputy approached death in 941 CE, a letter attributed to the hidden imam reportedly arrived. Its message was clear. No 5th deputy would be appointed. No new intermediary would come after him. The period of direct communication was ending, and with that, a new chapter began, a chapter that continues to this very day. This period is known as the Major Occultation. According to Twelver belief, the 12th Imam never died. He remains alive, hidden from public view, aware of his followers, and waiting for the moment Allah permits his return. He is known by several titles, including Al-Mahdi, Al-Qaim, and Sahib al-Zaman. And according to this belief, he will reappear near the end of time to fill the earth with justice after it has been filled with oppression and corruption. This naturally raises a question. How can someone remain alive for more than 1,000 years? Twelver theology answers that such a thing is possible through the power and will of Allah. Supporters of this belief often point to examples mentioned in the Quran, including the people of the cave, who slept for centuries by Allah's command. But what makes this doctrine so powerful is not merely the belief itself, it is the way believers live with it. For Twelver Shia Muslims, the hidden imam is not just a historical figure. He is not merely a future leader. He is a living reality, a living imam, a living guide, a living hope. Prayers for his return are recited regularly. The phrase, "May Allah hasten his noble reappearance," is spoken frequently in sermons, lectures, and daily conversation. In some communities, a symbolic place is even left for him at important gatherings, because for millions of Shia Muslims, the imam's absence is not simply a historical event that happened centuries ago. It is a condition they continue to live in every single day, waiting, praying, and preparing for the day they believe he will finally return. Belief about Karbala. Some events in history are so powerful that they do not remain in the past. They continue to live in the hearts of people for centuries. For Twelver Shia Islam, Karbala is that event. Everything begins on the 10th of Muharram in the year 680 CE. On the scorching plains of Karbala in present-day Iraq, Husayn ibn Ali, the beloved grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the 3rd Imam in Twelver Shia belief, faced a decision that would change Islamic history forever. According to the historical accounts, Husayn refused to pledge allegiance to the Umayyad ruler Yazid, whom he believed was corrupt and unworthy of leadership. At the same time, thousands of letters arrived from the people of Kufa, promising their loyalty and support if he came to them. Trusting those promises, Husayn set out on the journey. But when he arrived, everything had changed. The support he had been promised disappeared. The governor of Yazid had already crushed any possibility of resistance, and Husayn found himself standing alone, surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from help. With him was only a small group, around 72 companions, along with women and children from his family. Facing them stood a much larger army. Then the situation became even more desperate. For 3 days, access to the Euphrates River was blocked. Water was denied. Under the burning desert sun, thirst spread through the camp. Men, women, children, even infants. And then came the final choice: submit or die. Husayn chose death. But for many Shia Muslims, it was not only the fact that he died that mattered, it was how it happened. The thirst, the abandonment by those who had invited him, the killing of his infant son, and the suffering of the surviving family members. After the battle, the women and children were taken captive. Among them was Husayn's sister, Zainab. And according to Shia tradition, it was Zainab who carried the story of Karbala to the wider world, ensuring that what happened would never be forgotten. But Karbala became more than a historical event, much more. In Twelver Shia theology, it became a permanent symbol, a symbol of standing for truth, even when defeat seems certain, a symbol of refusing oppression regardless of the cost, and a symbol of choosing principles over survival. For this reason, Husayn is not remembered simply as a man who died. He is remembered as a man who refused to surrender what he believed was right. The famous phrase attributed to him, "Death with dignity is better than a life of humiliation," echoes throughout Shia sermons, poetry, religious gatherings, and political thought to this day. And this is why Karbala feels different. For many Shia Muslims, it is not just history, it is a living memory, a lesson repeated every year, a story retold every generation, and a reminder that some sacrifices are considered too important to be forgotten. Belief about Ashura. Every year, on the 10th of Muharram, hundreds of millions of Shia Muslims around the world remember one event, one tragedy, one sacrifice, the death of Husayn ibn Ali at Karbala. More than 13 centuries have passed since that day. Yet for many Shia Muslims, the memory remains as alive as if it happened yesterday. How Ashura is observed differs from country to country and community to community, but the reason behind it remains the same: remembering Husayn, honoring his sacrifice, and mourning what happened at Karbala. At the heart of Ashura are gatherings known as majalis. In these gatherings, speakers recount the events of Karbala in detail: the journey, the siege, the thirst, the abandonment, the sacrifice. Poetry is recited, stories are retold, and communities come together to share in grief for Husayn and those who died alongside him. According to Shia tradition, the theological basis for mourning comes from narrations attributed to the Imams themselves, describing their sorrow for Husayn and encouraging believers to remember his suffering. But Ashura is not only about listening. For some communities, mourning also takes a physical form. One of the most widely known practices is matam, the rhythmic striking of the chest as an expression of grief and sorrow. And then there are practices that have generated significant controversy, both inside and outside the Shia world. Among them is tatbir, also known as kamazani, where some participants strike their heads with blades during Ashura commemorations. What is important to understand is that these practices are not accepted unanimously. In fact, one of the biggest debates within contemporary Shia Islam revolves around this very issue. This is not simply a disagreement between Sunnis and Shia. It is an ongoing debate among some of the highest-ranking Shia scholars themselves. For example, Grand Ayatollah Khamenei publicly addressed the issue in 1994, describing tatbir as a wrongful and fabricated practice with no basis in Islam and prohibited it completely. Grand Ayatollah Sistani has not issued a definitive ruling either permitting or forbidding it. Meanwhile, Grand Ayatollah Sadiq al-Shirazi considers it a legitimate expression of devotion. So the debate remains active even today. But despite these disagreements, there is one thing that is not disputed: Ashura itself. From Iran to Iraq, from Lebanon to Pakistan, from India to communities across the world, millions gather every year to remember Husayn. Processions fill the streets. Mosques and gathering halls overflow with people, and some of the largest annual religious gatherings on earth take place during these commemorations. Because regardless of differences in how people express their grief, one conviction remains universal among Twelver Shia Muslims: Husayn's sacrifice must never be forgotten. The grief is real, the devotion is sincere, and for millions of believers, Ashura is not simply the remembrance of a historical event. It is the remembrance of a struggle between truth and oppression that they believe continues to carry meaning in every generation. Belief about prayer. At first glance, a Sunni and a Shia prayer may look almost identical: the same Arabic words, the same bowing, the same prostration, and the same goal: worshiping Allah. But when you look closer, you begin to notice several differences that come from distinct religious rulings that have been preserved for centuries. Perhaps the most noticeable difference is something called the turba. If you have ever watched a Shia Muslim pray, you may have seen a small clay tablet placed on the ground before prostration. Many people wonder what it is, and more importantly, why it is used. According to Shia jurisprudence, the forehead should touch natural earth or something that comes directly from the earth during sujud. This understanding comes from narrations stating that prostration should be performed on the earth or on what the earth produces. For this reason, Shia scholars generally require the forehead to touch natural materials such as soil, stone, or something that grows from the earth but is not normally eaten or worn. A woven prayer mat does not fulfill this condition. A clay tablet does. This is why the turba is used. And while clay from Karbala holds special spiritual significance for many Shia Muslims, any natural clay is considered valid. Another difference appears in the adhan. The call to prayer is largely the same, but many Shia communities include additional phrases. After the words "hasten to success," many add "hasten to the best of deeds." In addition, many Shia Muslims recite, "I testify that Ali is the wali of Allah." However, there is an important detail here. Shia scholars themselves differ on whether this statement is officially part of the adhan or whether it should be understood as a separate remembrance spoken after it. Another difference involves the timing of the daily prayers. In Sunni practice, the 5 prayers are usually performed in 5 separate times throughout the day. In Shia jurisprudence, however, there is a general permission to combine certain prayers even when not traveling. The midday and afternoon prayers may be combined, and the evening and night prayers may also be combined. As a result, many Shia Muslims pray in 3 time periods each day: morning prayer by itself, then Dur and Asr together, and later Maghrib and Isha together. Finally, there is one more visible difference during the prayer itself. If you watch a Sunni Muslim pray, you will often see the hands folded across the chest or stomach. But in Shia jurisprudence, this practice is generally considered impermissible. Instead, Shia Muslims pray with their arms resting naturally at their sides. And while these differences may be noticeable, it is important to remember that the overall structure of the prayer remains remarkably similar. The same Quran is recited, the same Qibla is faced, the same Allah is worshipped. Yet these distinct legal rulings have created prayer traditions that, while closely related, developed in different directions over the centuries. Belief in Muta. Now we come to one of the most debated and controversial differences between Sunni and Shia Islam, a practice that has been discussed, defended, and criticized for more than 14 centuries. It is called muta. The word itself literally means enjoyment, but in Islamic law, it refers to a fixed-term marriage contract. Unlike a permanent marriage, both parties agree beforehand on two specific things: the duration of the marriage and the financial compensation involved. Once the agreed period ends, the marriage automatically expires without the need for a formal divorce. And this is where one of the major differences between Sunni and Twelver Shia jurisprudence appears. In Twelver Shia law, muta is considered fully permissible. In fact, it remains an accepted part of their legal tradition to this day. The Shia argument is built upon two main foundations. First, Quran 4:24, and second, narrations found in Shia sources such as Al-Kafi, where the Imams are reported to have affirmed its lawfulness. According to the Twelver position, muta was practiced during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and was never prohibited by him. Instead, they argue that it was later prohibited by Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, and because Twelver Shia theology does not regard Umar's personal rulings as religiously binding, they continue to consider muta permissible. And this is exactly where the disagreement begins. The Sunni position is very different. According to Sunni scholarship, the prohibition did not come from Umar. Rather, it came directly from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him himself. Sunni scholars point to narrations found in Sahih Muslim, including reports attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib, which state that the Prophet prohibited muta permanent. For this reason, all four major Sunni schools of law consider the issue settled. From the Sunni perspective, muta is forbidden. From the Twelver Shia perspective, it remains lawful. And for centuries, scholars from both sides have debated the evidence without reaching a common conclusion. Shia scholars argue that some narrations used to prohibit muta conflict with other historical reports, and therefore should not override the evidence they consider stronger. Sunni scholars reject that conclusion and maintain that the prohibition is clear and final. As a result, the disagreement continues to this day. In modern times, muta is legally recognized in Iran and remains part of Twelver Shia jurisprudence. In other Shia communities around the world, its practice varies greatly depending on local culture, religious leadership, and individual circumstances. And even within Shia communities themselves, discussions continue regarding how the practice should be applied and understood in contemporary society. So while muta may be one of the most controversial topics in Sunni Shia discussions, it also remains one of the clearest examples of how different sources of authority can lead to very different legal conclusions. Belief in comes. Now we come to a belief that affects millions of Shia Muslims every single year. A belief that is not about prayer, not about theology, but about money, and more importantly, where that money goes. This concept is called khums. The word itself simply means 1/5 or 20%. In Sunni Islamic law, khums is generally associated with the distribution of war booty mentioned in Quran 8:41. But in Twelver Shia Islam, the concept developed into something much broader. Today, it is considered an annual religious obligation placed upon ordinary believers. According to Twelver jurisprudence, a person calculates what remains after a year's reasonable living expenses. What is left over is considered surplus income, and from that surplus, 20% is paid as khums. But where does that money go? According to Twelver law, khums is divided into two equal parts. The first half is allocated to needy descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who qualify for assistance. The second half is known as Saham al-Imam, the share of the Imam. Historically, this portion was given directly to the Imam himself. But after the beginning of the major occultation, the situation changed. Because the 12th Imam is believed to be hidden from public view, this share is now directed to the religious authority, or marja, that the believer follows. This naturally raises an important question. Why do millions of people willingly give away 20% of their surplus income? The answer lies in how khums is understood within Twelver theology. For believers, it is not viewed as an ordinary tax. It is seen as an act of worship worship, a religious obligation, and a way of supporting the cause of the imam. Many believers see it as a means of receiving spiritual blessings, strengthening the community, and fulfilling commands attributed to the imams themselves. And the practical impact of this system is enormous. In fact, much of the modern Shia religious structure is built upon it. The seminaries, the religious institutions, the charitable networks, the offices of senior scholars, all of these are largely funded through khums. This financial system also creates something unusual: independence. Because these institutions are supported directly by believers rather than governments, major religious authorities can often operate without depending on state funding. And this helps explain why influential figures, such as Grand Ayatollah Sistani in Najaf, can sometimes take positions that differ from political governments while maintaining their authority and influence. For Twelver Shia Muslims, khums is therefore much more than a financial contribution. It is a religious duty, a connection to the imam, and one of the foundations upon which the modern Shia religious world is built: belief in intercession. Now we come to another belief that plays a major role in the spiritual life of many Twelver Shia Muslims, a belief known as tawassul, or intercession. At its core, the belief is that the imams, even after their deaths, continue to hold a special spiritual status and can intercede on behalf of believers before Allah. Now, asking Allah for something because of the righteousness of another person is not unique to Shia Islam. Forms of this idea can also be found within traditional Sunni scholarship, but the Twelver understanding goes further. It includes directly addressing the imams themselves and asking them to intercede before Allah on one's behalf. To understand why, we need to look at the sources used to support this belief. Among the Quranic verses commonly cited is Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:35, where believers are instructed to seek a means of drawing closer to Allah. This verse is combined with narrations found in Al-Kafi and in the extensive Ziyarah literature, which describe the imams as maintaining an ongoing spiritual awareness and connection even after death. And this belief becomes especially visible through something called Ziyarah. Ziyarah refers to special devotional prayers that are recited either at the shrine of an imam or while facing toward it from afar. These texts are among the most beloved and frequently recited prayers in Twelver Shia religious life. In them, believers speak directly to the imam. They greet him, express their loyalty and love, and ask him to intercede before Allah on their behalf. For many Shia Muslims, this is not viewed as worship of the imam. Rather, it is understood as seeking help through someone they believe holds a special rank and closeness to Allah. However, this subject is not only debated between Sunnis and Shias. Even within Sunni scholarship, there have been different opinions. Many traditional Sunni scholars permitted forms of tawassul through the Prophet, peace be upon him, and other righteous individuals. At the same time, more recent conservative scholars argued that directly addressing deceased individuals and requesting their intercession is not permissible. This means the discussion is more complex than a simple Sunni versus Shia disagreement. It is a subject that has generated different interpretations across various schools of Islamic thought. And for Twelver Shia Muslims, the belief in intercession remains deeply connected to their relationship with the imams. A relationship built on love, devotion, spiritual connection, and the hope that those closest to Allah may intercede on behalf of believers before him. Belief in shrines and ziyarah. Now we come to a practice that millions of Shia Muslims travel thousands of miles to perform. A practice built on love, devotion, and a deep connection to the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him. This practice is known as ziyarah. For Twelver Shia Muslims, the shrines of the imams are not simply historical landmarks or tourist destinations. They are among the most sacred places on earth, places where believers feel spiritually connected to some of the most revered figures in their faith. Among the most important are the shrine of Imam Ali in Najaf, the shrine of Imam Hussein in Karbala, the shrine of Imam al-Rida in Mashhad, which is the largest Shia pilgrimage site in the world, and the shrines of the imams in Qadimiyya and Samarra. Every year, tens of millions of pilgrims travel to these locations. In fact, some of these gatherings rank among the largest peaceful human gatherings anywhere on earth. But why do believers travel such enormous distances to visit these places? The answer lies in the theology behind ziyarah. According to narrations attributed to the imams, visiting their graves is considered a highly virtuous act of devotion. For many Twelver Shia Muslims, ziyarah is not simply about remembering a historical figure. It is about maintaining a living spiritual connection with the imam, a connection they believe continues even after physical death. When a pilgrim performs a formal ziyarah, specific supplications associated with that imam are recited, prayers are offered, salutations are sent, and many believers present their personal hopes, worries, and needs while standing in the presence of the shrine. For them, it is a deeply emotional and spiritual experience, a moment of reflection, a moment of connection, and a moment of seeking closeness to Allah through those whom they believe were closest to him. As with many other topics, the Sunni response is not completely uniform. Visiting graves and praying for the deceased is widely accepted across much of Sunni scholarship. The main area of disagreement arises when personal requests or supplications are directed toward the deceased. Traditional Sunni scholars have often held nuanced positions on this issue, while more conservative movements generally regard such practices as impermissible. Because of this, the debate surrounding ziyarah is not simply about visiting graves. It is about the broader question of spiritual intercession, religious authority, and the relationship between believers and the righteous figures of the past. But for millions of Twelver Shia Muslims around the world, the shrines of the imams remain far more than monuments. They are places of devotion, places of remembrance, places of prayer, and symbols of a spiritual connection that believers feel has never been broken. Belief about Fatima. Now we come to one of the most beloved and important figures in all of Shia Islam, a woman whose name is remembered in prayers, sermons, poetry, and devotion across the Shia world. Fatima al-Zahra, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and according to Twelver Shia theology, one of the most extraordinary human beings who ever lived. To understand why Fatima holds such a special place, we need to go back to the days immediately following the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Because in Shia theology, what happened during those weeks was not simply a family disagreement. It was the beginning of a much larger story, a story that would shape centuries of belief. In Twelver Shia Islam, Fatima is not viewed merely as the beloved daughter of the Prophet. She is considered the 13th member of the 14 infallibles. Like the Imams, she is believed to possess isma, protection from error in religious matters. She is also known by a title of immense honor, Sayyidat Nisa al-Alamin, the leader of the women of all worlds. And her status is closely connected to a famous hadith that even appears in Sahih Bukhari. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Fatima is a part of me, and whoever angers her angers me." For Twelver Shia theology, this statement carries enormous significance. Because shortly after the Prophet's death, a dispute arose concerning a fertile estate known as Fadak. Fatima maintained that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had gifted the land to her during his lifetime. However, Abu Bakr declined to transfer it, citing the principle that prophets do not leave inheritance. What followed became one of the most important events in Shia historical memory. According to Shia accounts, the disagreement deeply affected Fatima. She remained hurt by what she believed had been taken from her, and only a few months after the death of her father, she herself passed away, still grieving, still mourning, and still carrying that pain. For many Shia Muslims, this is not remembered as a simple dispute over land. It is seen as a turning point, a moment that explains everything that followed. Because if Fatima's anger was the Prophet's anger, and if displeasing her meant displeasing him, then the events that caused her grief become far more than a personal disagreement. They become evidence of a deeper injustice at the beginning of Islamic history. And this is why Fatima occupies such a unique place in Twelver belief. She connects many of the major themes that run through Shia theology. She is linked to Ali, linked to the Imams, linked to Karbala, linked to the suffering of the Ahl al-Bayt, and linked to the question of leadership after the Prophet, peace be upon him. In many ways, her story runs beneath almost every major belief we have discussed so far. Even today, her memory remains deeply alive. The period known as Fatimiyya, the days commemorating her death, is observed with special devotion in many Shia communities. Her birthday is celebrated, her virtues are remembered, her name appears constantly in supplications and religious gatherings, and many believers seek her intercession and blessings in their prayers. For millions of Twelver Shia Muslims, Fatima is not simply a historical figure from the past. She is a symbol of purity, a symbol of suffering, a symbol of loyalty to the Ahl al-Bayt, and one of the central pillars of their spiritual identity, belief about the Sahaba. Now we come to one of the most sensitive and controversial differences between Sunni and Shia Islam, a topic that has shaped debates for centuries, and a topic that requires particular care to understand fairly, because when discussing the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there is often a major difference between what is found in certain classical texts and what contemporary mainstream Shia authorities officially teach today. The question is simple. How does Twelver Shia Islam view the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and especially the first three caliphs? When we look into classical Shia sources, such as Al-Kafi, we find narrations that contain extremely severe criticism of those who accepted Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman as legitimate leaders after the Prophet, peace be upon him. Some narrations even make very strong claims about the companions after the Prophet's death. These reports exist within the classical literature, and acknowledging that fact is important for understanding the historical development of Shia theology. But to understand why these figures are viewed critically in parts of the tradition, we need to understand the events that shaped Shia historical memory. Because almost every viewer eventually asks the same question: why are figures like Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Aisha, and Muawiyah discussed so differently in Shia thought? For Twelver Shia Muslims, much of this begins with the issue of succession. Abu Bakr and Umar are associated with the gathering at Saqifa, where leadership passed to Abu Bakr rather than Ali. They are also connected in Shia historical memory to the dispute surrounding Fadak and the grief of Fatima after the Prophet's death. Uthman is remembered in connection with the political developments of his caliphate and the growing influence of the Umayyad family. Then there is Aisha. One of the most significant events in Shia historical memory is the Battle of the Camel, where Aisha led forces against Ali. From the Twelver perspective, a companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, opposing the Imam, whom they believe was divinely appointed, is viewed as a profound mistake and one of the defining conflicts of early Islamic history. And then comes Muawiyah. Perhaps no political figure receives more criticism in Shia thought than him. He opposed Ali's caliphate, he established the Umayyad dynasty, and he appointed his son Yazid as successor. For many Shia Muslims, this decision eventually led directly to the tragedy of Karbala and the killing of Hussein ibn Ali. As a result, Muawiyah is often viewed as one of the central figures responsible for the chain of events that culminated in the greatest tragedy of Shia history. However, there is another side to the picture that is equally important. The official position of contemporary mainstream Shia authorities is generally much more restrained than some of the harshest language found in older texts. Many senior scholars consistently discourage public insults, cursing, or provocative attacks against figures revered by Sunni Muslims. Modern mainstream Shia scholarship often emphasizes the distinction between theological disagreement and personal hostility. In other words, one can reject the legitimacy of the early caliphate while still avoiding public abuse or sectarian hatred. And this is where the reality becomes more complex. There is not one single attitude shared by every Shia Muslim. Rather, there is a spectrum. At one end are individuals who openly express hostility towards certain companions. At the other end are those whose religious life focuses almost entirely on love for the Ahl al-Bayt, with very little attention given to early political disputes. And between those two positions lies a wide range of views held by millions of believers around the world. Belief in Marja'iyah. Now think about this for a moment. According to Twelver Shia belief, the 12th Imam has been in occultation since 941 CE. More than 1,000 years have passed, but life did not stop. New questions appeared, new technologies emerged, new financial systems were created, new medical procedures were invented, and Muslims still needed answers. So the obvious question became, if the Imam is hidden, who guides the community? Who answers these questions? Who explains Islamic law in a constantly changing world? The Twelver answer is a system known as the Marja'iyah, a global network of senior religious scholars, at the top of which stand the Grand Ayatollahs. These scholars issue rulings that guide the daily religious lives of millions of Shia Muslims across the world. At the heart of this system is a concept called taqlid, which means following or emulating a qualified religious authority. According to Twelver jurisprudence, any believer who has not personally mastered Islamic law is required to choose a living marja al-taqlid and follow his legal rulings. Let's make this practical. Imagine a Shia Muslim living in London. A new financial product becomes available, and he wants to know whether it is permissible according to Islamic law. What does he do? He looks up the ruling of the marja he follows. Today, this is often done through official websites where thousands of religious questions have already been answered in multiple languages. If he follows Grand Ayatollah Sistani, he follows Sistani's ruling. If he follows Grand Ayatollah Khamenei, he follows Khamenei's ruling. And this process repeats itself across countless issues in daily life. But why do millions of believers trust this system? The answer lies in how Twelver theology understands the role of the marja. For believers, the marja is not merely an educated scholar. He is viewed as the most qualified living representative of the hidden imam's guidance. Not the imam himself, but the closest available source of religious authority during the imam's absence. In this framework, following a marja becomes a way of remaining connected to the guidance of the hidden imam while waiting for his return. And unlike political leaders, marjas do not gain authority through elections, nor are they appointed by governments. Their status develops gradually through scholarly recognition, years of study, religious knowledge, legal expertise, teaching, writing, and the respect of other scholars. The system is also financially independent. As we discussed earlier, much of the religious establishment is supported through khums, which allows many religious institutions to operate without direct dependence on governments. And this independence gives the marjaya a unique role in the Shia world. Today, the two most widely followed marjas are Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani in Najaf and Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who also serves as Iran's supreme leader. And this naturally leads to one of the most important questions in modern Shia thought. Should religious authority and political power remain separate, or should they be united under the leadership of a religious scholar? And that question brings us directly to the next major belief in Wilayat al-Faqih. Now we arrive at one of the most influential and politically important beliefs in the modern Shia world, a belief that did not just shape theology, it shaped a country, a government, and the lives of millions of people. The question begins with something we have already discussed. If the hidden imam is absent, then who should govern an Islamic society? For more than 1,000 years, Shia scholars debated this question. Different opinions existed, different approaches developed, but there was no single dominant answer. Then in 1970, a Shia scholar named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini presented a solution that would change history. While living in Najaf, he delivered a series of lectures that were later published under the title Islamic Government. In those lectures, Khomeini built his argument step by step. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, governed society. The imams, according to Shia belief, would also govern if they were present. So if the imam is hidden, who should take responsibility? Khomeini's answer was clear. The most qualified Islamic jurist, the most knowledgeable scholar, the person best equipped to apply Islamic law. This doctrine became known as Wilayat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the jurist, and in its strongest form, known as Wilayat al-Faqih al-Mutlaka, absolute guardianship of the jurist. The senior jurist holds the governing authority that would normally belong to the imam during his absence. Of course, there is one major difference. The jurist is not infallible. Unlike the imams, he can make mistakes. But according to this theory, he remains the most qualified person available to lead an Islamic state. Khomeini argued that religion and politics cannot be separated, that Islamic law cannot function properly without Islamic governance, and that an Islamic state requires a senior jurist to oversee it and ensure that society remains aligned with Islamic principles. Then in 1979, this idea moved from theory to reality. The Iranian Revolution succeeded, the Islamic Republic of Iran was established, and Wilayat al-Faqih became part of the country's constitutional foundation. From that point forward, the highest authority in Iran would be the supreme leader. Today, that position is held by Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Under this system, the supreme leader possesses enormous authority. He oversees the military, the judiciary, major areas of foreign policy, and ultimately holds influence over the most important institutions of the Iranian state. In many ways, one theological idea became the foundation of an entire political system, which means that whenever the world discusses Iran's policies, regional influence, or international negotiations, it is also dealing with a system rooted in this religious doctrine. But there is something extremely important to understand. Not all Shia scholars agree with this model. In fact, one of the biggest debates in contemporary Shia Islam revolves around this very issue. The most prominent alternative comes from the Najaf school, represented by scholars such as Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. The Najaf approach is often described as quietist. According to this view, religious scholars should provide guidance. They should teach, issue legal rulings, and advise society, but they should not directly rule the state. In this model, the authority of the jurist remains primarily religious rather than political. And while Sistani has played a major role in Iraqi public life, he has generally done so from outside the government itself, offering guidance, not claiming political authority. This difference may sound technical, but its consequences are enormous because it shapes how governments are formed, how political power is exercised, and how religion and state interact in countries with large Shia populations. And so one of the biggest questions in modern Shia thought remains: should religious scholars guide society from outside political power, or should they directly govern in the imam's absence? The answer to that question continues to shape the Shia world to this day. Why Shia branches split? At this point, you might be wondering something. If all of these groups are Shia, then why are there so many different branches? Why did they split in the first place? To understand that, we need to go back to the central idea that runs through all of Shia history, the question of the imam. Again and again, whenever an imam passed away, the community faced a crucial decision. Who was the rightful successor? Which son? Which descendant? Which member of the prophet's family had inherited the authority to lead? And surprisingly, the answer was not always obvious. Sometimes a designated heir died before his father. Sometimes political circumstances made certain claims difficult or dangerous. Sometimes different groups interpreted the evidence differently, and each Each community sincerely believed it was following the true line of succession. As a result, new branches gradually emerged. The first major split came in the 8th century with the Zaydists. They disagreed over the succession after the 4th Imam and followed a different line of leadership. Later in the same century came another major division, the Ismaili split. This disagreement centered on who should succeed the 6th Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq, and from that point onward, Shia history began to branch in multiple directions. The story did not end there. Within Ismailism itself, another major split occurred during the 11th century. This produced the Nizari and Mustali branches. Today, the descendants of those communities include the followers of the Aga Khan and the various Bora communities found across the world. Then there are the Alawites, a group that emerged from a different historical path and developed many unique beliefs and traditions of its own. But despite all of these divisions, there is one belief that unites every Shia branch: the conviction that the family of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, held a special religious authority after his death. That is the common foundation. Where they differ is in the details: which members of the family inherited that authority, how that authority was passed down, and whether the Imam today is present, hidden, accessible, or understood in a different way altogether. In other words, the history of Shia Islam is not simply the story of one community. It is the story of multiple communities trying to answer the same question: who carried the Prophet's authority after him? And their different answers created the branches we are about to explore: Ismaili beliefs. Now we move to another major branch of Shia Islam, a branch with its own history, its own theology, and its own understanding of the Imam. This is Ismaili Islam. And just like many divisions in Shia history, it began with a single question: who was the rightful Imam after Jafar al-Sadiq? When the 6th Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq, passed away, the community faced a difficult situation. His son, Ismail ibn Jafar, had reportedly died before him. For many believers, this meant the imamate should pass to another son, Musa al-Kazim. This group eventually became the Twelver Shia, but not everyone agreed. Another group believed that the imamate had already been designated through Ismail and therefore could not be transferred elsewhere. According to this view, the line of leadership continued through Ismail's son, Muhammad ibn Ismail, and from this belief, the Ismaili movement was born. At first, the difference may seem small, just a disagreement over succession, but over time, an entirely distinct theological tradition developed. One of the most important concepts in Ismaili thought is the distinction between Zahir and Batin, the outward and the inward, the visible and the hidden. According to Ismaili theology, every religious teaching has two dimensions. There is the Zahir, the outward, literal meaning that anyone can read and understand, and there is the Batin, the deeper, inner meaning hidden beneath the surface. And who can fully reveal that inner meaning? The Imam. This is one of the biggest differences between Ismaili and Twelver thought. In Twelver theology, the Imam is often understood primarily as the divinely appointed guardian of religious law and guidance. In Ismaili theology, the Imam's role goes even further. He is the living interpreter of the inner truth of Islam, the one who reveals how eternal spiritual truths should be understood in each generation. Because of this, the guidance of the living Imam carries extraordinary importance. His interpretation is not simply another opinion. It is regarded as the authoritative explanation for the present age. And at one point in history, this theology gave rise to one of the most powerful Muslim empires of its time, the Fatimid Caliphate. Founded in 909 CE, the Fatimids built a vast state stretching from North Africa into Egypt and parts of the Levant. At its height, it became one of the greatest political and intellectual centers of the Muslim world. Cairo flourished, institutions of learning expanded, and Ismaili leadership ruled as both political and religious authority. For more than 2 centuries, the Fatimids represented the most complete political expression of Ismaili theology, but eventually the empire fell. Yet the movement itself survived. Over time, the Ismaili community experienced further divisions, producing the branches that continue to exist today. Aga Khan beliefs. Now we come to perhaps the most unique branch within the Ismaili world, a community whose beliefs about leadership make it unlike almost any other Muslim group. The reason is simple. While Twelver Shia Muslims believe their Imam is hidden, Nizari Ismailis believe their Imam is alive, visible, and leading the community right now, not waiting to return, not hidden from the world, but present in every generation. This belief sits at the very center of Nizari Ismaili theology. According to the Nizari tradition, the chain of imams never stopped. It continued from one imam to the next without interruption, right up to the present day. Until February 2025, the imam of the Nizari Ismaili community was Prince Shah Karim al-Husseini, widely known as the Aga Khan. He was regarded as the 49th imam in the Nizari line. Following his passing, leadership passed to his son, Prince Rahim al-Husseini, who is now recognized as the 50th imam. But But to understand the significance of this, you need to understand how Nizari Ismailis view the Imam. For them, the Imam is not simply a respected scholar, not merely a community leader, and not only a descendant of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He is the living guide for the present age. His guidance is considered authoritative for the time in which believers live. And because every age faces different challenges, the Imam's guidance is understood as addressing the needs of that particular era. This has allowed Nizari communities to adapt and evolve across different countries, cultures, and historical periods, while maintaining loyalty to the same living line of Imams. And this influence extends into religious practice as well. Unlike the conventional structure of 5 daily prayers practiced across most Muslim communities, Nizari worship takes place in buildings known as Jamaat Khanas. There, believers participate in communal devotional prayers known as dua, which form a central part of their religious life. Another important concept is didar. The word refers to seeing the Imam in person. For many Nizari Ismailis, this is not merely meeting a respected leader. It is considered a deeply spiritual experience, a moment of connection with the living Imam himself. When the Aga Khan visits a community, enormous gatherings often form. Hundreds of thousands of people may travel long distances just to see him. These gatherings are not viewed simply as expressions of admiration. They are expressions of a theological belief, the belief that the living Imam remains the spiritual guide of the community in every generation. And perhaps nowhere is this connection between faith and leadership more visible than in the work of the Aga Khan Development Network. This vast international organization operates schools, universities, hospitals, development programs, and cultural initiatives across multiple continents. For Nizari Ismailis, these projects are not separate from religion. They are part of it, because in their understanding, the Imam's responsibility is not only to guide believers spiritually, it is also to improve human welfare, education, healthcare, and quality of life in the world around them. In other words, religious leadership and social development are seen as two sides of the same mission, and that is what makes the Nizari Ismaili understanding of the Imamate so distinctive: a living Imam, a living authority, and a living institution that they believe continues to guide the community in the modern world. Bora beliefs. A community that traces its roots back to the powerful Fatimid era, but developed its own unique identity over centuries. This is the Dawoodi Bora community. Today, they number around 1 million people and are found primarily in India, with significant communities in Pakistan, East Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and North America. Like the Nizari Ismailis, the Boras emerged from the Ismaili tradition, but a major succession dispute changed their path forever. The split occurred in 1094 CE after disagreements over who should inherit leadership of the Fatimid Imamate. While one group eventually developed into the Nizari community, another followed a different line that became known as the Tayyibi Ismailis. And from this branch emerged the Dawoodi Boras. One of the biggest differences between the Boras and the Nizaris concerns the Imam himself. The Nizaris believe they have a living, physically present Imam. The Boras do not. According to Bora belief, their 21st Imam, Al-Tayyib, entered occultation during the 12th century and has remained hidden ever since. But if the Imam is hidden, who leads the community? The answer is a figure known as the Dai al-Mutlaq, the absolute missionary. According to Bora theology, the Dai serves as the earthly representative and vicegerent of the hidden Imam. He guides the community in religious matters, legal affairs, social issues, and overall leadership. Today, the 53rd Dai is Syedna Mufadal Saifuddin, who leads the community from Mumbai. For Bora believers, this is not merely an administrative position. The Dai's authority carries immense spiritual significance because he is regarded as the representative of the hidden Imam himself. And this relationship shapes nearly every aspect of Bora religious life. Another unique feature of the Bora community is its remarkable preservation of Fatimid traditions. In many ways, they have maintained elements of medieval Fatimid culture more completely than any other surviving group. Their religious heritage includes a rich liturgical tradition that blends Arabic, Persian, and Gujarati influences. Their legal system is rooted in the Fatimid school of jurisprudence, and many of their customs, ceremonies, and educational institutions preserve traditions that stretch back nearly 1,000 years. For this reason, the Dawoodi Boras are often viewed as one of the most historically continuous communities within the broader Ismaili world. Zaydi beliefs. Now we move to the oldest surviving branch of Shia Islam, a branch that many scholars consider the closest to Sunni Islam in both theology and law. This is Zaydi Islam. The story begins in the early 8th century. After the 4th Imam, a disagreement emerged regarding who should lead the community. One group followed Zayd ibn Ali, a descendant of the Prophet, peace be upon him, who openly challenged Umayyad rule. In 740 CE, Zayd launched an uprising against the Umayyad Caliphate. The revolt failed, and Zayd was killed, but his movement survived, and from it emerged the Zaydi tradition. What made Zayd unique was not only his lineage, courage. It was his willingness to stand up publicly against what he viewed as unjust rule. And this became one of the defining features of Zaydi thought. Unlike Twelver Shia theology, the imam is not chosen through a divinely designated chain known as Nas. Instead, a Zaydi imam must demonstrate certain qualities: knowledge, piety, leadership, and most importantly, the willingness to openly claim authority and struggle against injustice. This creates several major differences between Zaydism and Twelver Shiism. Zaydis reject the doctrine of infallibility. They do not believe imams are protected from error. They reject the concept of a hidden imam. There is no occultation in Zaydi theology, and historically, they generally did not embrace the doctrine of taqiyya in the same way found within Twelver thought. Another important difference concerns the early caliphs. Many Zaydi scholars historically refrained from condemning Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. Because of this, many scholars from both Sunni and Shia backgrounds have described Zaydism as the Shia branch that most closely resembles Sunnism. For centuries, Zaydi imams ruled large parts of Yemen. The Zaydi imamate remained a major political force until the Yemeni Revolution of 1962 brought it to an end. In modern times, the Houthi movement emerged from a Zaydi revivalist environment. However, it is important to understand that the Houthis cannot simply be equated with classical Zaydi theology. Modern political conflicts, regional dynamics, and the influence of post-1979 Iran have all shaped the movement in ways that go beyond traditional Zaydi doctrine. And that distinction is important when discussing the role of Zaydism in the modern Middle East. So while Zaydism shares the Shia conviction that the Prophet's family possessed a special religious authority, its understanding of leadership, the imamat, and political power developed very differently from the Twelver tradition we explored earlier, Alawite beliefs. Now, we come to perhaps the most controversial group discussed in this documentary, a group whose beliefs are so different that both mainstream Sunni scholars and mainstream Twelver Shia scholars have historically regarded them as outside the boundaries of Orthodox Islam. This is not being stated as an insult or a judgment. It is simply an explanation of where the majority of Islamic scholarship has traditionally stood. This group is known as the Alawites, also called the Nusayris. Their origins trace back to the 9th century through followers associated with the 10th and 11th Twelver imams. However, over time, their theology developed in a direction very different from both Sunni and Twelver Shia Islam. And this is where things become unusual. According to descriptions of Alawite theology, Ali ibn Abi Talib is not viewed merely as an imam or a righteous leader. Rather, he is regarded as the supreme manifestation of the divine. This belief is one of the primary reasons mainstream Muslim scholars have historically considered Alawite theology outside Orthodox Islamic doctrine. Another distinctive feature of Alawite belief is a religious framework built around three central figures: Ali, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Salman al-Farisi. Within this framework, Ali is understood as the inner meaning, Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the veil or outward expression, and Salman as the gate through which divine truth is revealed. These ideas differ significantly from traditional Islamic theology. The differences do not stop there. Alawite teachings have also historically included belief in the transmigration of souls, the idea that souls move from one life to another after death. This concept, often called metempsychosis, is not part of mainstream Islamic belief and is generally rejected by both Sunni and Twelver scholars. Over the centuries, Alawite teachings also absorbed influences from multiple intellectual and religious traditions. Researchers often point to elements associated with Gnostic thought, Neo-Platonic philosophy, and certain pre-Islamic Persian religious concepts. Another characteristic that makes Alawism difficult to study is its secrecy. Historically, many of its teachings were transmitted only to initiated members of the community, particularly initiated men. As a result, much of the tradition remained hidden from outsiders. This secrecy has produced two consequences. First, it has led to many misconceptions and exaggerated claims. Second, it has made it genuinely difficult for historians and scholars to fully assess certain aspects of Alawite theology from the outside. Today, Alawites are concentrated primarily in Syria, where they make up roughly 10% of the population. Smaller communities also exist in Lebanon and Turkey. And because of modern history, many people first encounter the term Alawite through politics rather than theology. The Assad family, which ruled Syria from 1970 until late 2024, comes from the Alawite community. However, it is important not to oversimplify the relationship between religion and politics. Alawite identity, Syrian history, and the policies of the Assad government are complex subjects that cannot be reduced to a single explanation. What is clear, however, is that Alawism developed into a religious tradition that differs substantially from both Sunni Islam and Twelver Shiism, and for that reason, it remains one of the most debated and least understood groups connected to the broader history of Shia Islam. Whether you agree with these beliefs or not, understanding them is the first step toward understanding one of the world's largest Muslim communities. From the Imams and the hidden Imam to Ashura, Taqiyya, and modern Shia branches, these beliefs continue to shape the lives of millions of people today. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing for more deep dives into Islamic history, beliefs, and civilizations. Now watch the next video.